Vessels are moving through the Strait of Hormuz. It's ahead of that Friday official signing ceremony of a deal to end the fighting in Iran. Take a look at this. These boats were seen at sea around the vital oil route earlier this morning. U.S. officials say the memo of understanding has been signed electronically by both sides. At the G7 summit earlier, President Trump addressed the new agreement with Iran. Here's what he said about the negotiation period it kicks off.
It's a 60-day period or so. I think it's going to happen fairly on time. We've been both involved. I think they're going to want to get it done. Iran wants to get it done. They have to get back to business. And the relationship is now normalized. So I think it's going to go pretty quickly.
CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi is in Geneva covering the G7 summit and joins us now. Olivia, all right, so Kelly and I were just sort of talking to ourselves about this. It helped us and the American people understand what this deal really is. It sounds like the way you hear some administration officials touting it, it's a peace deal, but it doesn't really sound like a peace deal. In other words, we signed an armistice with North Korea, South Korea. They've signed an armistice going back to 1953. Technically, they're still at war. Is that what we're looking at still?
Yeah, I wouldn't even go as far to call it a deal. Let's talk about it as a framework, a memorandum of understanding. This is what started the negotiations on April 8th when the ceasefire went into effect, was to just get an understanding between the U.S. and Iran about what they're actually working towards in the negotiations. And that's what they have at this point, the MOU, as they're calling it. It's been digitally signed. It's going to be signed physically in person in Switzerland on Friday by the vice president. And we're expecting from the Iranian side the Prime Minister Ghalibaf to be, or excuse me, the parliamentary speaker Ghalibaf to be the one who's signing it for the Iranians. But really, it's only a page and a half. We learned that yesterday from the vice president. It's a very brief document. Take a listen to what President Trump just told some reporters in a room before he met with the president of the UAE about what's actually in it.
Here's what it says. Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. That's what it says. It won't have one. To buy, to develop, they will not have a nuclear weapon. And I would say that's about 99.9% of what I wanted.
Now, there's also some stuff in there about the Strait of Hormuz being reopened toll-free, according to the U.S., even though Iran says that they will be able to impose tolls on ships going through the strait. We have seen some traffic there this morning of ships going through. So there's still some discrepancies about what is actually in this document. As far as Lebanon as well, President Trump has said that it doesn't include a ceasefire extending to Lebanon. The Iranians said that it does. So there's still a lot of questions, and the president said, we will see this text, but we're not going to see it until Friday because he wants it to be released in a formal setting. He also at one point teased that he could potentially read it word for word at a press conference that he is slated to do tomorrow here in Geneva for the G7. So we'll be waiting to see if perhaps we know more tomorrow or if we do have to wait until Friday.
And Olivia, obviously a lot of other things going on at this G7 meeting. Ukrainian President Zelensky met with leaders there today. Might we see President Trump meet with Zelensky?
Well, they did end up having a very brief meeting. There was supposed to be this general working lunch of the G7 leaders, and Zelensky kind of crashed it. You saw him and President Trump and Secretary Marco Rubio kind of on the sides having this little informal chit-chat. But President Trump said that he will meet formally with Zelensky later in either a bilateral meeting or a trilateral meeting with Macron. So there is that expectation there. President Trump was asked about that. He did say he spoke to President Putin over the weekend. He also spoke to Zelensky over the weekend ahead of the G7, but President Trump said he wants to see Russia make a deal. That's notable, of course, because Russia was the one who started that war in Ukraine. They've been losing about 30,000 soldiers a month. Now President Trump says he wants to see them take up a peace deal with Ukraine.
All right, Olivia, thank you so much for that context. One issue hanging over the tentative deal between the U.S. and Iran is Israel's conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Now, President Trump is expressing frustration at Netanyahu's handling of the war. I want you to take a listen to this.
Now, I'm not happy with the way Israel has handled themselves with Lebanon and with Hezbollah. They should have been able to do the job faster. It just goes on forever. And when that happens, it throws a negative light on the big deal, and that's the deal with Iran.
For more on this, we're joined by CBS News senior foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab, who's in Tel Aviv. So Imtiaz, two-part question for you. You know, we just heard the president's remarks. What does that tell us about the state of U.S.-Israeli relations, and how could this conflict with Hezbollah that Israel is involved in impact that possible deal with Iran?
Hey guys, good to be with you. Look, those are some pretty extraordinary comments from the president. He said an awful lot more, and it really just underscores the tension, at least on an individual to individual level, between the president and the prime minister here of Israel, which I have to say, if we take a few steps back and look at the politics here in Israel right now, for Netanyahu, they're not good. Not only are his rivals bitterly criticizing him over the handling of the Iran war, and more importantly, this deal that appears to be close between the U.S. and Iran, also his allies are criticizing him. And so for President Trump to make the comments that he has is really putting the screws on Prime Minister Netanyahu. Having said that, the relationship between these two countries remains in lockstep on every other level. There is intense cooperation on all fronts. But as you say, the thorny issue of Lebanon continues to be a major issue. The president making it very clear that he's very frustrated with Israel's presence in Lebanon, even suggesting that the Syrian leadership would do a better job in dealing with Hezbollah than Israel could. Still, it does remain to be seen just what Israel is going to do, how it's going to respond. But it is saying, and it has been very clear, that what's happening in Lebanon, its role in Lebanon, has nothing to do with this agreement, this potential agreement between the U.S. and Iran. And that is their red line. Guys.
One of the components of this tentative agreement, Imtiaz, is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. What's fascinating to me is that the Strait of Hormuz was open before this war of choice between the United States and Iran. What this war has proven is that Iran can open or shut down that strait willy-nilly. So what is the plan there?
That's a really good way of putting it, Vlad. Look, it's astonishing to think that just 4 months ago, most people had never heard of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, almost everybody knows what it is. And the fact of the matter is that Iran has shown that it has almost complete control over the strait. Now, we do have this dueling blockade in place that the U.S. has imposed, and of course, Iran has imposed, both sides saying that is going to be lifted, and President Trump saying ships are already going through. Now, our colleagues at CBS Confirmed have told us that around 6 vessels have already made it through the strait. But when you consider historically that on average 138 vessels, and that means tankers carrying oil, tankers carrying LNG, and indeed just everyday goods like fertilizer and the other thing, used to pass through, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get that going to where it was. Guys.
All right. Imtiaz Tyab reporting from Tel Aviv. Thank you, my friend.